Okay. So good evening, everyone. Welcome once again with technical difficulties, but we seem to have overcome them, to the Buddhist Path of Awakening course. And we are working through the book Mind at Ease by Traleg Kyabgon, Traleg Rinpoche. And tonight we're going to be talking about the last part of chapter 3 and chapter 4. We didn't include the first part of chapter 3 because Michael and I decided that we didn't think it was that good. We didn't like it as much. But you can read it if you wish and make your own decision. But the last part of chapter 3 is quite good, and we're going to be going through that right now. And then Michael will talk about chapter 4. So let's bow in. We're starting on page 44 with the section Renouncing Conceptual Understanding. In this regard, let's just take a good posture for a moment and bring your mind right here into this present moment. You're looking at whatever you're looking at. I happen to be looking past a computer monitor at trees out a window. It's raining. Your awareness is relaxed here. You don't have to be aware of anything in particular. Your eyes are open. Your senses are all open. Without effort, we rest here in awareness. This is the fundamental awareness that pervades our being. It's always here. Thoughts come and go like clouds against this sky. And when they're gone, then there's just the sky. And even when they're present, the sky is still here. It's the ground against which figures appear and disappear, like these words. And we all just rest here, watching these figures, the words, thoughts, whatever it might be, bodily sensations, come and go. And when they go, there's just this space of awareness with whatever happens to be appearing in it. Okay, you can relax now. That's a joke. Because the very essence of this kind of awareness is relaxation. It's effortless, always here. And this is what he's talking about with this idea of renouncing conceptual understanding. Concepts are the figures that come and go against this ground of awareness. They're like birds flying in the sky. They come and they go. And once they're gone, you can barely even remember that you've had a concept, an idea. You're on to the next and the next. So he says that the next step on the spiritual path is to renounce conceptual understanding. That is, at least as regards the spiritual path, this clear, open awareness is much more profound. It is profound. It's profundity itself. And conceptual understanding are just pointers to it, leading us to it, and then disappearing. He says, while conceptual understanding is crucial in the earlier stages of the path, once it has served its purpose, it is relinquished in favor of this clear, open awareness. So it's just like, the Bruce Lee thing in the movie, the finger pointing to the moon. That's what conceptual ideas are. They're fingers pointing to the moon. Or the raft that takes us across the stream in the Buddhist analogy. And once you get across the stream, you let go of the raft. You don't keep carrying it with you. The same thing with concepts. Concepts are meant to bring us back to this clear, open awareness. This is the practice. This is reality. This is the doorway into, and ultimately is, enlightenment itself. So we're not swayed by thoughts, good or bad, samsara versus nirvana, and so on. These are delusory. He says, as we progress along the path, we will experience a transcendental realm. That's this realm, here, now, where there is no need to conceptualize about either the finite world or ultimate reality. You don't have to. Concept is just an extra, and it goes by itself. It dissolves into space. Concept is based on inference. What that means is there's logical argument. If this, then that. But true spiritual understanding, this clear awareness, is based on just direct experience, here, in the moment. And it's very clear. You don't need to conceptualize it. Like you all understand these words, you understand this face, these gestures, what's on your computer screen, everything. And it doesn't need words. Words are an add-on. And ultimately, they're unnecessary concepts. They only serve one purpose, and that's to keep themselves and the illusion of self, ego, alive, to keep it going. It's like a story that continues to tell itself. He says, when we eventually have a direct experience of ultimate reality, it is actually not possible to conceptualize it or express it through words and ideas. Words are just the finger pointing, like the finger pointing to the moon. The reality is there. The finger is just a pointer. Conceptual understanding has to lead to realization beyond conceptual understanding. That's the whole point of the finger. That's the whole point of words, is to lead us to this understanding that is ultimately ground. It's our ground of being, and it's beyond words. Words are just tags, just as if you were to write the word table on a piece of paper and scotch tape it to your table. That's what words do. Then there's the reality, the table. The same thing with our enlightened mind. Talks about spiritual experiences and realization. Experiences are when you have a moment, spiritual experiences of real clarity. Can be very powerful. Many people have experienced this, something that wakes them up. It may just be a moment, it may go on for some time. This is what a spiritual experience is. And it wakes them up from the dream of concept. And they're fickle. They come and go. You can't really make them come. Somehow they arise momentarily. If you practice, they'll come perhaps more often. And they fluctuate, they vary. And they give us the motivation to practice because we want to know more about that world, be in that world of the real, beyond neurosis. He says they'll come and they go, wax and wane, and they become memories. That's the thing. You remember, oh yeah, I had that memory. I was walking down the stairs and the light came through the window and it just woke me up from my dream, and suddenly I was wide awake and the world was brilliant. And you have a memory of that. And the instruction is don't fixate on them. These are positive experiences. They're called nyam in Tibetan. Nyam is both a good thing and a bad thing. It's a bad thing if you try to hold on to it, because they come and go by themselves. and they'll start to lead you into having spiritual realizations. Dokpa are, oh yeah, I had a moment of real clarity. It's the words, it's the story that you tell about that. So there's the experience, and there's what he's calling here the spiritual realization, meaning a story that you can tell that you had that experience. He says it's better to avoid fixating on experiences because there's less strain in your practice and less egotism. It's also important to remember that in the spiritual journey, self-transformation is a continuous process, not a one-time event. So you may have that moment of realization, and it requires more, and you relax and they come. Through being transformed in this way, habits drop away in this way. He says, so we should not fixate on arriving, getting there to the experience. The journey is changing forward because we're not fixating on things. That means that we're changing slowly by constantly coming back, by shifting our allegiance from self-aggrandizement, from self altogether, to awareness in this present moment in which the self evaporates. Then he talks about letting go, that the spiritual journey is a process of learning how to let go of things, learning how to relax into this world and let go of the idea of achievement. He says all our problems, miseries, and unhappiness are caused by fixation. That means that's ambition. Latching onto things and not being able to let them go. We want to hold on to that experience. You can't. It slips through your fingers. First, we have to let go of fixation on material things, he says. This includes our position in life, our family, standing in the community, as well as material possessions. All trying to hold on to all those things is the source of misery. We're learning to be free of things and circumstances. We're learning to be genuinely humble. We all want to be more than what we are. And this path is really a path of letting all that go. He says, eventually, in order to be free, to be totally free, we learn to let go of concepts altogether, that they were a delusion. If we tried to use them to capture truth, if you just want to write the word table and scotch tape it to your table, that's okay. And one of the first steps, he says, the final step, that's interesting. So we learn to let go of concepts which bind us to particular ways of experiencing things. We keep trying to experience things in this way that we conceptualize them, and that produces misery. Even the subtlest kind of conceptual distinction makes us subtly unhappy. So we have to transcend both the seduction of samsaric pleasure that turns out to be so illusory and the seduction of our spiritual goal as well, that appears to be offering eternal happiness. If we let go of both of those, where do we wind up? Here, clear, awake, here in the present moment, able to deal with this life. He says, once the pull between these two poles is harmonized and transcended, we're ready to return home. Return home? What does that mean? That means this. Here, we're already here. We just keep taking byways and sort of little journeys away from here. Journeys on, I'm going to get enlightened. That's a good one. Journeys on, I want to be rich, and I'm going to work hard at that. And eventually we give up on those goals and we come back and we're where we always were, here and now. And then he talks about the fruition of the spiritual path. It's discovering not only that you are already in reality, this is it, but that you embody it. There's nothing more to gain. This is it, and you and I embody it, that we are the Buddha. Your ordinary body becomes the body of the Buddha, and your speech, and your mind, which pretty much covers the waterfront. This is the great transition you have to make, relinquishing the separation of samsaric beings and Buddhas. How do we do it? By constantly coming back to this and beginning to realize that this, now, here, clear, is real. And gradually, it dawns on us more and more that we are home. And there is continuity, because what you become is what you have always been, for better or for worse. At the end of the journey, you're simply returning home. And there's a famous parable in Buddhist lore about a mother who's living in a house in a valley, and she has 5 children, and they've never met their father. And finally, one day, they all are clamoring. They'd like to go see their father. So she agrees to take these children to go see their father. And they set out on a journey, and they leave the valley. They climb up the walls of the valley, and they go on this long journey. And after, who knows, weeks, they come to a valley. And they look down into it, and there's this house. And they go down into the valley, and they go into the house. And the children are exploring the rooms with great delight. And suddenly they open a door, and there's their father. And they realize that the house that they've come to was the house that they left. They were to go on this long journey, and they've returned back to this same house, and they've discovered their father. This is a metaphor for our path, that we have to go on this long journey to discover that we were there initially. This journey, he says, is absolutely necessary because, one, you, I, are so immersed in, believe in the delusions and the conflicting emotions that are the product and expression of each one of our karma. We really believe in them, and we are habituated to them, repeating them over and over again. He says, but after a point, you have to ease off that struggle. Because as you progress on the path, the positive qualities needed for further advancement are becoming part of you, willy-nilly. It's like you're doing the practice, you're studying, you're going through change willy-nilly. And they're becoming part of you rather than something to be acquired and possessed. Actually, what we're doing is we're discovering them in ourselves. So we have to let go of our fixation on virtues, accumulating them as if they were wealth, or we will be enslaved again. And we'll experience envy, possessiveness, and egotism, and wander from the true path. Momentarily, eventually you come back. We do develop our virtuous qualities of love, compassion, joy, courage, determination, resolve, mindfulness, awareness, and wisdom. These come with practice as we progress along the path. At some point, we have to accomplish one final act of detachment, which is to let go of concepts altogether. Even the concept of virtue and vice, redemption, karma, and liberation all have to be relinquished. And then he tells the Zen story of the teacher who has a student, and he keeps getting messages from the student about his progress, and he's sort of discouraged. And finally, he has a message from the student. He asks the student how he's doing, sends a message to him, and the student concludes, "Who cares?" And he's very happy. The teacher figures the student's gotten it. So finally, he says, it's only the journey that makes you realize your true potential. It is only at the end of the journey that you understand that the goal is not separate from the starting point. It was there all along. We just didn't know it, like the children in the house. That is the attainment of Buddhahood, the natural state of your own mind. That's the end of that chapter. So I'll turn it over to Michael.
Okay, so to make a transition to the next chapter, I think if we reflect on meditation practice itself, we can kind of see how concepts can be helpful and also how they can be hindrances. When we might come to meditation practice with some general concepts that meditation is good for us in some way, and we might enter practice with some idea of a goal of some kind to reduce suffering, to be calmer, less distracted, less confused, less driven, or what the teachings say is the best motivation, the best intention, which is to attain enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings, which is what we mean when we recite in the chants, in order that all sentient beings may attain Buddhahood. From my heart, I take refuge in the three jewels. But whatever our intention, whatever our goal, whatever our thought, we begin by making some effort in meditation practice to make the recognition of awareness easier for us. So there's some effort and conceptuality in the beginning. The effort being to take a good posture, to find a physical environment to practice in that's perhaps a little quieter or less distracting. We make some effort, some thought on our mind to let go of any other physical activities at least, and some willingness to let go of thoughts of past and future and settle in the present. But paradoxically, to actually practice, we really have to let go of all of that. We have to let go of any sense of deliberate effort, any sense of a goal to be accomplished, anything to be gotten rid of. We have to let go of all these concepts once we begin to practice and learn to just simply be. And this is tricky because giving up concepts is a concept in itself. So that's why there's so much emphasis in meditation instruction on relaxation, letting go, just recognizing and letting go, seeing and letting go. That we can just tune into awareness that's already here if we just relax and let go. And then, of course, we drift away and wander and come back again and again, but that's part of the practice as well. So I think even in the meditation practice we do, we can see how concepts are helpful in pointing us to where we want to go and perhaps helping us start out. But once we actually engage with the practice, we need to renounce concepts. We need to just simply be in the space that we're in. Just be in awareness. And the next chapter really gets into this. The chapter is entitled Deluded Mind, Enlightened Mind. It's very easy in reading this chapter to think of one as good and one as bad. But that's conceptual mind again, just creating its goals, its dreams, its ideas. So what we really need to do is understand mind. And that's really how the chapter starts. The first thing that he says is the spiritual quest begins with our own mind. That we can only understand ourselves and our world through the kind of mind that we have. We need the structure of our mind and the functions, states, and processes of our consciousness determine the range of what we experience. Therefore, we must develop an understanding of our consciousness, an understanding of our mind, before we can think of developing as spiritual beings. And he makes the point that if we do not pay attention to our minds, we really can't speak about Buddhist spirituality at all. So this is what we're being introduced to in this chapter. As Traleg Rinpoche said about other concepts, concepts are helpful in pointing things out to us, helping us learn to recognize things. It's like if we had to go to a train station to pick up somebody we'd never met, we might be given a description of some kind, and that would be helpful in finding that person. But once we're there with them, we're there. And that's the whole idea of how we can tune into awareness. That's the whole idea of how we can tune into actually looking at our mind. We're given some description, but then we need to let go. We need to just see. In working with mind, in looking at our mind, in opening ourselves to ourselves through meditation practice, as well as through study and contemplation, we're emulating the Buddha, who did exactly that, sat under the Bodhi tree, looked at his mind, realized his true nature, and was transformed, became the Buddha, the fully awakened one. One important point that he makes in the beginning, also in the beginning of this chapter, is we need to utilize the mind we have. In other words, we're not approaching mind from the point of view of that we should experience something different, or that we're looking for something else that we might have. We need to work with how we are, what we are here on the spot. And in regard to this, he says that Buddhism teaches that the mind functions on two different levels. One level is the deluded mind, or nanshe, which is the cause of all our misery, frustration, and pain. And the other level is the enlightened mind, or yeshe, which is the quality to free us from that suffering and pain. So mind, in this fundamental sense, can work on these two levels. We can either experience deluded mind, confused mind, distracted mind, or the undiluted mind, the mind that sees things clearly. And he says this is a distinction we need to understand. He goes on to say that the topic of nature of mind surfaces regularly in the Mahamudra teachings, as well as the Mahamudra practice. And that the nature of mind is such that there is no real difference between the deluded and undiluted state of mind. And he said this is actually a statement made from the ultimate point of view, whereby the deluded mind and undiluted mind are considered to have the same nature. But from a relative perspective, they invariably appear as two radically different mental phenomena. The best analogy I've heard to describe this is the analogy of ice and water, where ice is frozen, solid, water is fluid and free, and that the enlightened mind and the nature of mind itself is more like water, whereas the deluded mind, fixed mind, mind bound up by concepts, is more like ice. But in its nature, it's water. So that the nature is the same, but the experience is very different. We know the difference between holding an ice cube and just feeling water. It's very different. Ice is solid. So there is the difference, and yet the nature is the same. But again, in our experience, we'll experience deluded mind and wisdom mind or enlightened mind as two very different things, even though in their fundamental nature they're the same. And ultimately, in Mahamudra practice, the realization of their sameness is an important step. It goes along with what we talked about last week in terms of the four yogas, with the notion of one taste or one flavor. But that only comes with a great deal of clarity in our practice, and a great deal of recognition in our practice. So the next section, he talks just briefly about what is enlightenment, but actually a lot of the rest of the chapter deals with this. And what he says is enlightenment, he actually says what it's not, that it's not an altered psychological state, and that he also says that mind training, which he talks about later in the chapter, should not be understood as a form of psychotherapy, although it can certainly help. It can certainly help reduce suffering. It can certainly help lead to more clarity and self-understanding. But it's not, neither of these, neither an altered state nor therapy, are the same as the spiritual transformation of enlightenment. That we're not just becoming a better version of the same thing, but that there's actual switch of allegiance, an actual change in how we are, what we experience in the world, and how we experience ourselves. And with this, he begins talking about ordinary consciousness and wisdom consciousness, which is another way of talking about deluded mind and enlightened mind. And he says that the spiritual transformation is not obtained through cultivating the mind that we experience on a daily basis, the mind that anticipates, remembers, worries, and has all manner of confused, agitated states. This is the mind that we ordinarily experience, mind lost in the three times, caught up in dreams of past, present, and future, confused, distracted, overwhelmed. He says it's not the empirical mind that we normally experience, even though mind training is dependent on that mind. It's where we begin. It's what we begin to work with. But rather, it is the undiluted mind, the enlightened mind, that we have to cultivate in order to transcend the limitations of our normal states of consciousness. It's the mind that we come to recognize by being able to let go, relax, settle in meditation practice, and simply be in awareness. Undiluted mind, he says, is called wisdom consciousness, or yeshe, while diluted mind is the ordinary diluted consciousness is namshe. And he says the difference can be difficult to convey in words. But as we begin to access wisdom consciousness, we'll be able to generate a genuine, penetrating spiritual insight, or transcendental knowledge, or prajna, which we talked about in previous classes. And it's ultimately prajna, clear seeing of prajna, the knowing quality of mind that we experience through prajna, that leads to gnosis, or jnana, which is the enlightened mind. And he makes it very clear over and over again that diluted mind is not the same as our undiluted mind, except, again, in their essential nature. But in our experience, they're very different. That the samsaric mind is severely affected by I like the way he phrases this, is severely affected by the inflammation of various forms of spurious, illusory states. It's conceptual mind, the samsaric mind, that's over and over again creating worlds, dreams, moment-to-moment experiences that are illusory, that are fabricated, contrived. Sometimes diluted mind, in other teachers will call it the afflicted mind, that is mind that's afflicted by the kleshas and afflicted by conceptual veils. He says our minds have been driven into a state of confusion through the relentless arousal of conflicting emotions, the kleshas, excessive anger, overwhelming desire, inflated pride, unforgiving resentment. That samsaric mind is in a state of constant, unremitting restlessness that can hardly be said to be conscious at all. And he says, when Buddhism stresses cultivating the mind, our primary concern is learning how to deal with our ordinary diluted consciousness in such a skillful way that we can go beyond it and realize our wisdom consciousness. So this is what we're learning to do, what we're practicing in the Hinayana teachings, in the Mahayana teachings, and most directly in the Vajrayana teachings. He says wisdom mind is not attained as something new. It's something that we already have. It's no different than what we've read and talked about in previous classes. The whole idea of, in the Vajrayana, that it's not simply that we have the essence of Buddha in us, but that we actually have the fully developed Buddha in us, but that we don't recognize that. So, again, wisdom mind is not attained as something new, but it might feel that way to us because we don't recognize our nature. But that's a misperception. He says delusion has to be overcome so that wisdom mind is allowed to arise naturally. Emphasize the word naturally, that it is our true nature, that it is who we are, and that when we're able to get out of our own way, when we're able to relax, let go, wisdom mind is there naturally. It's not something that we need to create or contrive in any way. And in fact, trying to contrive or create something is just a further obstacle. It's just a further elaboration of conceptual mind. If we have some idea, for instance, that desire is the problem, the passion, desire is the problem, then we start conceptualizing not having desires, not having passions, which is just another type of desire. And if we start seeing aggressive mind as a problem, we want to get rid of it, which is just another expression of aggression. So conceptual mind can't undo conceptual mind. We have to relax. We have to let go. We have to allow ourselves to just be and see what we are. And that's why we have to allow it to arise naturally. And he says that we can do this because the capacity to attain wisdom mind consciousness is already present as the innate quality of mind. So it's awareness, simply being present. That's where we begin. It's just something we need to tune into. We don't need to create it. We don't need to make something happen so much as we need to let go and allow it to happen. So with this, he begins talking about mind training, or mental cultivation or mind training, which he says is the essence of the Buddhist path of practice. And here he's talking about the different types of meditation practice that we do, that all meditative techniques are forms of mental cultivation. And he says here that we're not talking about manipulating our everyday experiences of consciousness in some purposeful fashion. This again would be the effort of conceptual mind to create something. He says, if anything, we're trying to bypass that mind and access a state of consciousness that is undiluted, precisely because there is a sense, he uses the word perspicacity, a sense of perspicacity or clarity within it already. So we can think of that as that mind already has, when we settle, we can see this, that mind already has an inherent clarity, an inherent precision to it, that we don't need to bring in something from the outside or something that's lacking. We need to recognize what we already have, what we already are. And he says that deliberate maneuvers, in other words, trying to create or contrive something, would still stem from everyday consciousness that is, as he says, not all that conscious really, due to the delusions that we constantly carry around. And with this, he says, there's another way we can be with ourselves, that we can rise above deluded, egoistic perception. This is the attainment of wisdom consciousness, the attainment of enlightened mind, a level of consciousness that is, quote, literally lit up or illuminated so that our ability to perceive things increases exponentially. And we have, as John was saying, we have nyams, we have these experiences in meditation where we are able to settle, where suddenly we do see things clearly, where suddenly we realize that, just as it says in the chant, everything that arises is fresh, vivid, here and now. We have these, at least as temporary experiences. And as John said, the problem comes when we either try to hold on to them or create these experiences as opposed to just letting them occur. He says mind training develops wisdom consciousness and allows us to gradually extricate our beings from the influence of our ordinary deluded consciousness, which is so habituated that can only bring more misery and pain to ourselves and others. And as we train our mind, as we work with ourselves in meditation practice and through contemplation and study, the influence of our deluded consciousness gradually decreases. And as a result, the greater powers of our wisdom consciousness begin to develop. What actually happens is it begins to become uncovered, less obscure. As we have read about in the Profound Treasury, the Ocean of Dharma, the Vajrayana view in particular, whatever obscuration, stains, whatever may be obscuring the mind is not inherent to the wisdom mind itself. It's all viewed as a temporary stain. It's something that can be removed, but it's not innate. And that's what he's talking about here. Eventually, he says, the ordinary deluded consciousness ceases to operate, leaving only the undiluted wisdom consciousness. And with this, he says, this is a real transformation, that the Buddha's mind is completely different from our own mind. There has to be a complete transformation in our own mental continuum. And with the next section of the book, he begins talking about what he perceives as some problems in people's understanding of what enlightenment and what practice are, especially in the Western mind. It begins by saying that this is more than simply being aware. It's not simply staying in the present. And therefore, because by staying in the present, being less likely to be overwhelmed by negative states. He says that it's not entirely true that just a lack of disturbance is enlightenment, nor is it entirely true that there's no difference between a mind that is aware and a mind that's enlightened. It's where we have to start. But I think what he's talking about here is very similar to what Trungpa Rinpoche talks about in terms of the problem with God realm or jnana states, where we experience a state of calm, a state of peace, and begin to hold on to that and believe that that's enlightenment. On the one hand, it's necessary to settle the mind so that we begin to see, so that we begin to experience some clarity. But it becomes a problem when we start trying to hold on to states of mind. And this is something that we've heard over and over again in the Profound Treasury. He says we have to start with a state of awareness in terms of our psychological state. But true awareness ultimately stems from our wisdom consciousness, not from the deluded state of mind. In other words, again, it's not something that we try to create or hold on to. It's something that we simply allow ourselves to experience. Simply training our ordinary consciousness to be aware in the present will not in itself lead to liberation easily, he says. Spiritual realization occurs over an extended period of time. We must learn to gradually operate from the level of wisdom mind through the methods of mental cultivation and extricate ourselves from the delusory habituated states of mind. And he says we are not and never can be free in our normal states of consciousness. And he goes into some of the reasons why this is and how the deluded mind perpetuates itself through engagement with its dreams and delusions and the actions that lead to karma. He says we think we're making choices, but we're not choosing in a genuine sense. It's more the case that we're following our habitual tendencies and deluded understandings. We'll never be free so long as our habits are continuously reinforced. The sorts of things that we think about and the sorts of emotions we experience all go toward perpetuating the illusory states of mind. We have to understand that our perceptions of normal consciousness is illusory and that it's based on distorted views and emotional turbulence. And for that reason, we go in circles so long as we're caught up in deluded mind. And he says, Buddhism counsels us to resist being abused by our conflicting emotions and to let go of excessive thinking. And emphasizes that overindulgence in conflicting emotions and distorted forms of thinking only reinforces our old habits, which solidifies our karmic tendencies further. So again, this is what we're being asked to recognize. This is what we're asked to begin, certainly on the Hinayana and Mahayana level, to begin to refrain from. But he goes on to say it's not that we want to eradicate feelings and emotions, that once ignorance is purified, all our capacities and functions of normal consciousness are enhanced. We simply have to renounce the ignorance that's behind our deluded states of mind. So again, I think mind operates on these two levels. We experience deluded mind, and sometimes we experience enlightened mind or wisdom mind. And what we're trying to cultivate is our experiences of wisdom mind. And we do this through meditation practice, which is why the final section of this chapter is titled The Importance of Meditative Practices. And here again, we're talking about shamatha or tranquility meditation, as he calls it, vipassana or insight meditation, as he calls it, and then meditation on the four immeasurables, which is one way of meditating on compassion. We were introduced to the four immeasurables, but as well, we also use Tonglen as a meditation on compassion. But in his case, we'll be talking about the four immeasurables in a later chapter. And he says that tranquility meditation, or shamatha, is designed to deal with our conflicting emotions. And this is because so long as we're under the sway of conflicting emotions, mind is so unstable that it's difficult for us to see or understand anything. So that it's through shamatha that we are able to settle down, begin to develop some steadiness, and begin to develop some clarity. And with that, with the settling of shamatha, vipassana meditation or insight meditation becomes possible. And he says this is designed to aid us in our effort to overcome the proliferation of thoughts. And this happens because through vipassana, we begin to develop awareness of the space around thoughts. We're not so caught up in thought after thought. We don't believe in thought after thought. We begin to see some of the transparency of thoughts. we begin to see that we feel one way in one situation, another way another time. And so we're become less attached to or less convinced of the reality of what we're thinking. We begin to see through thoughts a little bit with Vipassana practice. And then with the meditation on the four immeasurables, or meditation on compassion, it has to do directly with developing compassion, through which we overcome self-cherishing and self-centeredness. Through meditation on compassion, we learn that we don't always need to put ourselves first, that we can be more open to other people and more open to the world around us. So all of these things make it easier for us to experience wisdom mind. He says that tranquility, or shamatha, and insight, or vipassana, tranquility and insight meditation are both concerned with giving rise to our wisdom consciousness. And he asks, how do our habits become entrenched? They become entrenched through our lack of awareness. We go about our business, we do things in a mindless, inattentive fashion without really being fully conscious of what we're doing. So by learning to be present, which is shamatha, aware of what we're experiencing, aware of our minds through Vipassana, we begin to overcome our habits. We begin to overcome our habitual lack of awareness. He says to understand how emotions and distorted forms of thinking arise, we have to first calm the mind with shamatha practice, or tranquility meditation. And from this, we train ourselves to recognize the experience of our thinking and of our emotions through Vipassana practice. And he goes on to say that, again, according to Buddhism, emotions in themselves are not evil, base, or defiling. It really comes down to how we relate to our emotional experience and how we express our emotions. But he also says that there are emotions that aid in the development of wisdom, which is why we practice and develop compassion through the four immeasurables. It's said that mind of compassion is closest to wisdom mind, so that by practicing the four immeasurables, practicing Tonglen, practicing the Mahayana teachings, we come very close. Of all the meditation techniques, though, insight meditation, or Vipassana, is the most important because it allows us to see into the nature of things. Without insight, we'll never overcome the habituations and conflicting emotions of our deluded consciousness. And he says that Vipassana, or insight meditation, reveals all of our experiences to be based on a distorted type of thinking that misperceives and misinterprets everything. It's through Vipassana that we begin to wake up. We begin to see how we're driven, how we act in terms of habit, and we begin to be able to let go. When we become to recognize, when we're able to be present and aware, we actually have a true choice as opposed to an illusory choice. With this, he says that we become increasingly clear to us that consciousness is not passive. It's an active agent that determines how and what we perceive and how we employ our interpretive schemas. And it's through this, in the diluted sense, that we develop fixations, but it's also through awareness that we are able to let go, relax, and learn to simply be. That we have to gain insight into how mind imputes all kinds of fictitious characteristics and attributes to things. In other words, how we project onto things that aren't really inherent to them, but have much more to do with our feelings, our hopes and fears. And again, this is what I mean, we begin to see the transparency of thoughts. We begin to realize that we don't need to take as real everything we think. As he says, if we lessen the mental tendency to reify everything, reify meaning to take as solid or real, if we lessen that mental tendency to reify everything, all the other practices fall into place, which is why Vipassana is so important. Without this insight into the nature of things, it's not possible to make the transition from ordinary deluded consciousness to our wisdom consciousness. So in beginning to lessen our tendency to reify everything, what we're talking about is beginning to have some sense of what we've talked about before as emptiness or the boundlessness of things. And again, just developing some ability to appreciate in the immediate moment the true nature of things. He says that Shakyamuni Buddha was an ordinary human being, but that does not suggest he was still just another human being after attaining enlightenment, that he was completely transformed. We have to think about becoming an elevated being and of loosening our attachment to our normal human characteristics. So I think what we're talking about here is coming to make the switch of allegiance that we've come to talk about, making a complete identification or a complete confidence in, a complete ability to be our wisdom mind, to be, to manifest completely our enlightened nature. And he says the state of enlightenment is a state of being that is truly transformed and illuminated with the spiritual qualities and attributes of our innate wisdom consciousness that we, as ordinary sentient beings, can hardly fathom. So with that, we can open for discussion, comments, questions, and answers. Well, I just had another thought that maybe we could think of this entire chapter as an excellent example of what Trungpa Rinpoche meant when he talked about knowing what to accept and what to reject.
Could you elaborate on that a little? What do you mean?
Just that we, as we develop in our meditation practice, of course, this is easier said than done. We increasingly become able to recognize our mind, what's happening in our mind, and we can recognize when we're engaging in diluted conceptual mind, and perhaps be able to let go, or even just rest in the awareness that recognizes that, and allow ourselves to relax and open up.
I think, too, that to the extent that we achieve some kind of progress on the path, it almost comes as a surprise that we've been practicing, studying, and suddenly we realize that we are changing, however subtly and gradually, and that we were trying to change, but that didn't work. But then it happens anyhow. It just happens if we follow the path and the discipline. Barry, can you switch the view to a gallery view?
I can't do that. I did take the spotlight off Michael, so.
Oh, okay. Because then it's just, there we go.
I thought it felt a little cooler.
Huh?
I thought it felt a little cooler.
Oh, you're very cool, Michael. Judith. You're muted, Judith.
Okay. I'm not sure I'm getting it. If you are to know your own mind, is that like, what was his name with an M, who saw that he was a murderer and a bad guy. Yeah, Milarepa. And decided that he needed to change, that he wanted to be otherwise. Is that an example of knowing your mind, seeing yourself or your mind?
I think it's the beginning. It's the initial resolve to begin to want to change oneself fundamentally, spiritually, if you will.
But isn't that latching on to a concept.
It is. And Traleg Rinpoche says that in the beginning, concepts are necessary to guide us onto the path. And then eventually we let go of them.
So when you notice the qualities of your mind, in other words, such as going into, say, a neurotic pattern of resentment, are those the characteristics of your mind that you conceptualize in the beginning?
I think so, yeah. And they are the neurotic mind
Right.
that we are letting go of by coming present into this space of awareness. But
So, yeah.
Usually we're just so caught up in that resentment or whatever it may be that it never occurs to us to just fundamentally switch our allegiance from that resenting, conceptualizing mind to open awareness here and now.
Just kind of dropping it.
Yeah, because, and being aware.
Recognizing it, seeing it's a concept and saying, I don't need this.
You don't have to say, I don't need it. You just see it. Because until you see it, you're busy dreaming it. You're dreaming, oh, that person, they shouldn't have said this to me, and I'm going to get back at them, and you're all caught up in the dream. And as soon as you see it, you're awake. You realize it's a dream. And then you have a choice. Until you do that, you have no choice. We're lost in the dream.
Yeah.
So meditation is about waking up from those dreams and seeing those thoughts. And he's going to be talking about this, the importance of, you see, there are two approaches to Vipassana. There are two aspects of the way it's practiced in the Mahamudra and in Dzogchen. So far, we're really doing the Dzogchen practice, which is to come completely clear and present now. That's the great perfection style of Vipassana, insight meditation. But there's another style that has to do with contemplation, where you examine your experience. And that's Mahamudra. And we're going to be coming to that, where you see your thoughts. I'm having this thought of anger about this person because they offended me, and I'm all caught up in this offense and this anger. And when you see that, you can see that it's just a thought, a dream that comes and goes. And that brings a different kind of insight. So we'll be coming to that. I'm really looking forward to that chapter.
Yeah.
The chapter on Vipassana.
Great, thanks.
Mark?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's great, great readings. I'm going to go back to you, John. That one, the story in the book with the teacher and the student, and he's seeing the connection of everything to himself, and he's having all these wonderful thoughts, and then at the end, it's who cares? I don't know. I don't want to go there. I enjoy the path. Essentially, I think, but correct me if I'm wrong, it's you reach the state where nothing, it just really kind of, do I ever want to go there? Where there's no Sangha, there's no wonderful teachers, there's no Dharma, there's no path. Is that really, well, first, I think what we have to get is we got to stop looking for the goal. So I get maybe that's part of what we're trying to learn from this. But all right,
I think
fine. Yeah.
you're on the right track. Absolutely. And the way in which they describe what you're talking about, which is a more advanced stage, you might say, I guess, is they talk about the yogi or the siddha or the practitioner engaged, having given up the idea of trying to get enlightened and get somewhere and be self-improvement. Then they are delighting in playing with the world, constant communication, constant enjoyment, constant exploration. When
Thanks.
Trungpa Rinpoche was approaching his death, he said he didn't think he was going to be reborn as a teacher. He wanted to be reborn as a Japanese scientist. That's what he said. It was the heyday of Sony and Matsushita and all that, you know.
A good career choice. Thank you.
Thank you. Great work. Who else?
If I could make just a
Please.
comment here that I think I've heard many times this idea that being awakened or being enlightened or whatever is going to be some kind of state where it's kind of everything is flattened out and nothing matters because you're detached from everything. You know, I mean, that's getting into nihilism. I mean, the fact is that the more enlightened one becomes, the more present, the more awake. Actually, it's the reverse. Everything becomes much more vivid, interesting. You're more engaged in everything that's going on. So I just wanted to say that.
Who else? Philip, don't you have anything?
Oh, Miriam has her hand up.
Oh, she does. Good.
Yeah, I have to say kudos to you guys for picking this book because this chapter, I just loved it. It did illuminate things for me. And one important thing that was said at the beginning, which I'd been thinking about, but no one ever articulated it for me in this way, you know. This is in reference to religion and to how people have these conceptions of God and how God must be or how God should operate. And one thing that we don't realize is that this is within the range of our, you know, cognitive abilities. Everything that we can conceptualize about spirituality, about God, it is within what he says here is that the structure of our mind, the functions, the states, the processes of our consciousness determine the range of what we experience. And for me, that just kind of right there zoomed in to the narrow band of our ordinary consciousness. It's a very narrow band. It is based on the brain that we were born with. And that, you know, what he's talking about is relinquishing some of those restrictions, and that in that space nothing can really be defined. And so it just for me clarified what I had before seen as a very important limitation to religion, or what I would have understood as a a fabrication, our own fabrication of what God must be about. And so I really appreciated it. And I think this author is very clever and is explaining things in a way that is helping me anyway, understand this better. So that's all I wanted to say.
Terrific.
Yeah.
What does he say about non-theism? Is it in this chapter, Michael, about theism and non-theism, or is it a different
I think it's
place?
in this chapter.
Huh?
Not in this chapter, I don't think.
Well, the first sentence is
Mhm.
being a non-theistic religion that is neither theistic nor atheistic. Buddhism does not begin with a belief in God or some kind of supernatural power. It does not necessarily deny the existence of God, just has a different frame of reference.
Yeah. And the different frame of reference is not belief in God, belief in not God, like atheism. It's direct experience. That's what he says, which is determined by our mind. Direct experience. That is the frame of reference that Buddhism uses right now. This, So it has nothing to do with theism or non-theism, which are conceptual philosophical systems. Buddhism has to do with direct experience. This says it right there. I thought it was terrific the way he said that.
Yeah, it is in there, I forgot. And it's also that each concept by its very nature binds us up in some way. That's why I liked how in the previous chapter where he talks about letting go of concepts frees us. And that, the range of our mind is bound up by the concepts that we are both aware of. And sometimes the teachings talk about coarse and subtle obstacles, the ones that are obvious to us, but even the subtle ones we're so habituated to that we don't even recognize that we're making a choice or that we're seeing things in a particular way. We just think that's the way they are. And it's only when we relax and settle enough in meditation that we begin to see that it's, that it's a point of view that we're holding on to, that it's not how things actually are. And sometimes the subtler things that are harder to give up because they're harder to see.
So thank you for zeroing in on that.
Yeah.
And Philip, you have your hand up.
Yeah, two things. So I want to follow up with Miriam. It is certainly very exciting to consider that we could go beyond our individual awareness to an appreciation that is beyond anything we've ever imagined. It just gets beyond my ability to put it into words. But the endless potential that is available to us here is mind-boggling. That's the first thing. So I agree with you, Miriam. And somehow that's the same thing that Barry was saying from the other side, that it wouldn't be at all boring to get to that point, right? It would be just the opposite. But the other thing I wanted to say, I put this quote into chat, which is from one of my favorite teachers, Ken McLeod. And this is from his book, An Arrow to the Heart. And he's commenting on this line about the 5 skandhas, but he's talking about the limitations to like formal study and conceptual thought. And over we hear what we want to learn is beyond thought and word and concept. And he says it so nicely here. I'll read it if you don't mind. He says, he's talking about us, I guess, himself, all of the people who have studied Buddhism. And why we need to move beyond conceptual thought. He's been fishing in these buckets for thousands of years and never had a nibble. He continues to study them, seeking to unlock the mystery of fish. Useless pails, full of holes, throw them away. So that may not connect for everyone, but it connected for me. It seemed well said.
Indeed.
Thank you.
And by the way, I want to mention, I started, we were doing this other course now on Thursday, starting back on volume 1, The Path of Individual Liberation. And so I'm reading ahead to prepare for this. It's knockout. It's like I've never seen it before. It's just terrific. So I encourage you to take a look. And if you read the first 3 chapters after the introduction, if you've got the book, and if you don't have the book, you can get it for free in a PDF at pdffiles.com. And then if you decide to buy it, you can buy it, and we've got a discount, a 40% discount on it from Shambhala. If you want to buy it from Shambhala. But just take a look at those first 3 chapters. I was just knocked out. So it's so funny. You go over and over this stuff. I've been doing it for 50 years. Can you believe 50 years? It sounds nuts. and it's still new.
For what it's worth, I had the same experience.
Yeah.
Again.
I know. It's amazing. I mean, where was I? What was I listening to? What was I reading when I read those chapters the last time? Where was my mind? So I encourage you to look at those first 3 chapters. The first one, the one on the first one's, I think it's probably chapter 3 that really knocked me up. That's my guess. I don't have the book in front of me.
It's wonderful. Things change. I love to reread these books. Our position changes.
Yeah.
It's great.
Well, we're getting near the end. Who else? Philip, you already spoke. I'm sorry. Someone else? This material is so profound, maybe it makes it hard to talk about it. Randy, we never hear from you. I can't, you're muted. You're muted still.
Perhaps his lips are sealed.
His lips are sealed, yeah.
Or perhaps we're fated not to.
Cody, are you 108, 108? No. Who was 108, 108? Somebody wanted to get in.
There was someone here earlier that was 108, 108.
Yeah. I didn't let him in because I didn't know who she was. I asked them to change their name. Well, perhaps we should draw this silent to a close. This silent discussion.
Wait, Karen Sue.
Karen Sue, good.
Okay. When we have a direct experience of ultimate reality, it is actually not possible to conceptualize it or express it through words and ideas. So that's why we're all so silent.
But you can point the finger to the moon.
Yes.
And it's not the moon, but it makes you look.
So we all just should point.
And we don't want to miss all that heavenly glory.
Pointing always meant to me I'm pointing a finger at the moon, 3 are pointing back at me.
Yeah, that's a AA thing.
Oh, is it? Oh,
Yeah, yeah. I've been told that one. When you point the finger of blame at somebody, 3 fingers are pointing back at you.
yeah.
Roll all blames into one.
Aha.
Well,
There you go.
Trip, you want to lead anybody before we draw this to a close?
Yeah, I have something for just for food for thought. I think in the I don't know what page it is offhand, but it was like in the first couple of pages of the second half of the third chapter. He uses the phrase, "We have to unknow ignorance," and to me that has a lot of implications. That ignorance is not simply not knowing something or ignoring something. It's an active process of conditioning and obfuscation, and ignorance is it implies that ignorance is a learned process, and which I think is the implication, and it's what we've been saying for a long time. But it's a pretty unusual phrase, unknowing ignorance.
I love that.
Yeah, yeah. We have to unknow ignorance and know wisdom.
That's almost a koan.
Yeah.
I think it's just knowing in the sense, experience knowing, cognizing. I mean, that's what the mind does, but it's interesting.
Unknown.
That's what I got to throw it out there for tomorrow, maybe.
No. Well done.
Oh, can you put up the chats? I had to switch to an iPad.
I could do it. Got it.
All right. We'll close by reciting a prayer for peace and then dedicating the merit earned by our practice for the benefit of all sentient beings. By the blessings of enlightened and compassionate ones, by the power of my positive actions of 3 times and my prayers of pure aspiration, may wars, conflicts, epidemics, and all other maladies dissolve in this world, and may the earth and all who live on this earth enjoy the abundance of well-being. May all learn to live lovingly with each other. By this merit, may all obtain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom, may the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled, may all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. That was excellent. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
Michael. Thank you, John.
Good to see you all.
Have a good night.
Yes,
Good night.
good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.